Welcome to the Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Ancient wisdom, modern life, and the way. Visit us online at taoananda.com or find us on all the socials. Now, the Modern Taoist.
Well, hello and welcome to episode, are we up to episode 9 already of the Modern Taoist? My name is Kit Man. Our last episode, if you are coming to us after episode 8, it was the episode about hate, and it was a bit heavy. And today's episode, because the Tao flows heavy to light all the time, we're doing a lighter episode. And I never ask enough. So no matter what platform you're on, if you could like and or subscribe or whatever it is you do, click the little heart. That would be very, very helpful. I don't ask enough, and I guess I need to ask more. So there you go. I've asked. Please like or subscribe. Like I said, usually we drop one episode every Tuesday. I decided to do 2 this week because I felt that hate episode. That one weighed on me a little bit, not in a negative way, just in a, it was something we needed to talk about, but I didn't want to dwell and make the podcast be all about something that, that heavy, that serious. I wanted to prove, I think, for lack of a better word, that Taoism isn't just a serious monks, sitting around drinking tea, being serious all the time. There's lots of happy, very much lots of happy in Taoism. And if you'd like to ever ask a question, you can do that at taoananda.org. It's DAOANANDA.org. There's a form right there on the front page, or you can go to moderntaoistpodcast.com, and that takes you directly to the podcast page, and you can fill out the form there to ask a question. Now, that's what today's episode is about. Well, it's not about asking questions. It is about a question that came in through taoananda.org. And that question was one that kind of stuck with me after I saw it. Because at first I just laughed. I was like, yeah, we're not doing that. But then it stayed in my head. And I said, you know what? That's actually a really interesting question. Let's talk about that. And the question is, are there any Taoist superheroes? And at first that sounds pretty playful, like something you joke about in a movie marathon or something, but it's actually, when you think about it, a really deep question. Because superheroes at their heart are way more than just the costumes and the blowing people up and stuff. There are modern myths. They are our version of Achilles, our version of whatever superhero mythos existed 1,000 years ago. And I'll tell you about some ancient Chinese superheroes too in this episode. And right now those myths are everywhere. Superhero films are number 1 at the box office the moment they're released, even the bad ones. There are entire streaming series built around them. Video games let us step right into the role. And, for better or worse, these stories shape how people think about power. They give us a language of heroes and villains, good and evil, strength and weakness, which means asking whether Taoism has a superhero or could have a superhero is kind of asking, what does Taoism say about power, responsibility, and how to wield those? Superhero, by tradition, are often defined by force. They fight bigger and harder than their enemies. They win by overpowering. But Taoism doesn't glorify that kind of domination or an endless struggle. Of course, we've talked about it before. Taoism teaches that soft and yielding will outlast the hard and unbending, right? So that's what we're going to explore today. Not because Taoism is about capes and costumes, but because looking at the superhero lens, or through the superhero lens, lets us ask, what would a Taoist hero look like? Do we already see Taoist qualities in some of the heroes we watch? And what can that teach us about living heroically? That isn't about finding Lao Tse in the Marvel lineup. It's about seeing how Taoist wisdom speaks into the stories and our culture. And maybe Taoist heroism is a little closer than we think. So let's kind of step into it and see what comes up today. When people were to ask, if anybody does other than this person that emailed in, about Taoist superheroes, it helps to remember every culture has its own heroic figures. I mentioned Achilles, Hercules, as you get more modern, Superman, larger-than-life characters defined by physical might and extraordinary gifts. Ancient China had its own figures that filled that space in myth and story and imagination. Zhong Kui is one that comes to mind, often called the demon-queller. In legend, Zhong Kui was a scholar who failed his imperial exams and took his own life in despair. So he had a test he had to take. He failed, said, "That's enough for me," and killed himself. But in the afterlife, he was recognized because he had this really fierce spirit, and he was given authority in the afterlife to command an army of ghosts and demons. And in temples and in art, he's portrayed as this protector who drives away evil spirits. He doesn't save the world by brute strength alone, because he has a spiritual authority, a reminder that power can come from clarity and balance, not just muscle. So that's one ancient Chinese superhero, quote unquote. There's Guan Yu, a historical, he was a general from the Three Kingdoms period, who later became deified as a god of loyalty and righteousness. And in folk tradition and in Taoist temples, Guan Yu is not worshipped as an unbeatable warrior, but he's portrayed as a symbol of integrity and honor and the courage to act right, even at great cost. And then, of course, there's the 8 immortals, the Ba Xian, which offer yet another lens. These 8 immortals figures are drawn from Taoist legend, and each of them has a gift. One has a fan that revives the dead. Another has a flute that can heal. And they don't dominate armies. They use wisdom and skill and unconventional tools. Their stories are more about their wit than their might. And their power kind of flows from the alignment with the Tao rather than force alone. These figures, in their own way, right? They're superheroes in their own way. They carry these extraordinary abilities and qualities. They protect the vulnerable. They fight imbalance. They're not defined by invincibility or domination. They're defined by wisdom and balance and relationship to forces larger than themselves, because that's where the contrast comes in, right? Because modern superheroes that most of us know, the ones, in the comics and the movies and the games, that's very different. In that model, problems are solved by bigger punches, stronger weapons, louder explosions. The hero always wins because they overpower their opponent. Conflict is framed as a clash of equals, where the side with the more determination and muscle and vision of strength built on domination is always going to win. From a Taoist perspective, that's where the tension lies, right? Because Taoism does not glorify domination. It does not tell us the hardest and the loudest will endure. It tells us that what bends lasts. What yields survives. And what flow finds its way even when confronted by walls. Taoist heroes would never conquer the world by smashing it into submission, right? They live in balance with the world and find ways to endure and even thrive without being broken. So when this person asked, are there any Taoist superheroes? The answer begins with history and myth. Yeah, there are figures in Taoist tradition who carry that heroic spark, but they point us to a different vision of heroism than the one Hollywood usually sells. Taoist hero stories invite us to ask, what does true strength look like? So that's the question we'll follow. To answer that, we first need to understand what Taoism actually says about strength and action. If the ancient Chinese had Zhong Kui and Guan Yu and the Eight Immortals, today's culture has Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, Iron Man. They fill the same role as those old stories, right? They show us ideals. There are very many ideals that we could learn from them if you take away the need to dominate. Ideals of courage and sacrifice. They also reveal, though, what culture values. Okay? The reason we see superheroes everywhere, in films and games, streaming platforms, is that we live in an age hungry for a hero. We are desperate for figures who would stand against this chaos and give us some sense of order in this world that is becoming more and more fractured all the time. But that's the tension. Because most of the modern superheroes are built on a very specific model. Good versus evil, force versus force, victory through strength and domination. The hero wins because they punch harder. Power is the ability to defeat an enemy. That makes sense in a movie theater. But in Taoism, the model misses something. Okay, or that model misses something. The Taoist model says if you meet force only with force, you stay trapped in that cycle. Superman's always trapped. Have you ever noticed? Every time he beats somebody bigger comes along that he's got to deal with. So you stay trapped in that cycle. When you meet force with force, Taoism says, what happens if strength is not defined by domination? Is there anybody we can think of? Spider-Man. Let's take Spider-Man. What makes him compelling is that he's never the strongest. What defines him is restraint. He could kill, but he doesn't. His challenge is using his power responsibly. That restraint comes closer to Taoist clarity, the ability to act without losing yourself. That's pretty close. Not that Spider-Man is a Taoist, but it gets pretty close. Or Black Panther. His story is less about beating up enemies and more about how a leader carries the responsibility, how power can serve a community and not just an individual. Okay, well, that in Taoism would be the value of harmony and balance. But Black Panther isn't a Taoist figure, obviously. His narrative hints at that ideal, though. Strength as a stewardship. And even a character like Batman, who, let's face it, in many aspects, he's a bit of a fascist, right? But he's defined by aggression. But really, when you look deeper, he does carry a bit of a Taoist tension. His vow not to kill anyone is a form of self-discipline, a recognition that if he crosses that line, he becomes the very thing he opposes. Well, that is a bit of a Taoist teaching right there. The danger is not only in the enemy's violence, but in letting that violence take root in you. The point isn't that these characters are secretly Taoist. Far from it. It's that even in modern myths of domination, though, audiences respond to those most deep moments of restraint and balance and compassion. We cheer louder when the heroes go through some kind of clarity and mercy and not just throwing buildings at each other. And that tells us something, right, about our longing for balance in a chaotic world. We are more moved by the clarity and the restraint internally than we are by throwing a train at somebody. So why do superheroes matter to people so much right now? Because they offer simple stories in a complicated time. The world right now feels unstable, and it has for a while. So people look for heroes who can set things right. The risk, however, is that if we absorb this superhero model without thinking, we start to believe that force is the only answer. Look at the government. Every problem doesn't need a fight. Louder, harder, stronger doesn't always win. That's a trap. Yes, strength matters. But the deepest strength that you can have, that you can possess, that you can portray outwardly is balance. That's the key difference here. Taoism doesn't tell us to give up on superheroes. Doesn't ask us to push all that aside. It asks us to redefine what heroism is. Not domination, not endless fighting, but clarity, compassion, endurance. So we can now ask, how do compassion and clarity shape a Taoist version of heroism? People picture these heroes, they often imagine somebody that never backs down, right? The kind of hero that stands toe-to-toe with every villain, fights till the end. That looks a lot like Superman. Invincible, unshakable, never retreating. And while that image is inspiring to some, it is the opposite of Taoism. And that is because Taoism teaches us there's times when the stronger choice is to just step aside. And that sounds strange at first, right? Because doesn't compassion mean staying with people no matter what? Doesn't distance mean you don't care? From a Taoist view, that's the opposite. Compassion and distance belong together. Compassion is seeing that hate, that cruelty, that violence, and that it comes from fear or pain. So you protect yourself from being consumed by it. You live with an open heart without letting other people's storms define your life. Let's bring this into like a daily reality. Imagine you're scrolling through the news and you see endless violent images. The compassionate response is to care that the suffering exists. Be moved by it if you must, but if you spend all day watching every clip, replaying every detail, you're going to carry that violence with you in your heart. So take some distance and say, I acknowledge this suffering, but I also know I need to step back. That's not apathy, that's clarity about what you're able to hold in your spirit. Think about you're having an argument with a friend or a relative. The conversation turns to violence in society. We had examples of this in the last couple of weeks. And those conversations can quickly get heated. And you realize if you keep pushing, this is going to spiral. So you're a compassionate person, and you remember that their anger at you is coming from somewhere else. Fear, frustration, maybe even helplessness. Distance doesn't mean leaving and never coming back and throwing up your hand and just saying, I'm out of here. It means choosing not to escalate, to preserve both yourself and the relationship. And if the relationship doesn't survive because of your de-escalation, you've preserved yourself, and that's okay. Because the anger is theirs to carry at that point. So Taoism doesn't want you to stand in front of every blow. It tells you to know when standing firm is balance and when stepping aside is balance. So that's why the image of Superman never walking away can be a bit misleading. Because real strength is not about fighting every single battle. It's about choosing your battles with clarity. Okay? There's another side to this too. Compassion without distance will burn you out. If you try to carry every violent image, every painful story, your friend's anger, your friend's pain, you'll collapse under the weight of it. Distance without compassion makes you hard. It makes you cold and detached and unwilling to care. Compassion keeps your heart open. Distance keeps your balance intact. They go hand in hand. You can't do one without the other. You can't have compassion and continue to maintain a constant struggle, and you can't have distance without the compassion. This matters because in real life we don't get capes and superpowers. It gives us messy situations where people around us are caught in fear and anger and obsession with violence. And in those moments, you can't save the world by force. Okay, but you can live heroically in a Taoist way by showing compassion. Not domination, not endless fighting, but compassion. A way of living that lets you endure and protect yourself without losing yourself and everybody else. Before we get into practices, it's worth asking, why would this person even ask if there's a Taoist superhero? Underneath the question, to me, when I read that, is a longing. I may have read it completely wrong, but how I read it was this person has a longing. They want to know if Taoism can give them the same spark of inspiration that they feel when they watch Superman or Spider-Man or whatever. They want to know if Taoism has any room for a heroic figure to show us how to stand tall in a world that feels messy and unfair. I think on a personal level, many people are asking, how do I live like that? How can I become a hero in my own small way? Taoism doesn't have capes and leotards, right? But it does give us practices that can feel like superpowers in daily life because they shift the way you experience the world. And that's the number one thing here. You can talk about and think about Taoism all the time. But if you go 2 or 3 days without practicing, you start to notice that you were much healthier when you were practicing, mentally, physically, spiritually. These practices keep you balanced in situations that would normally overwhelm you. Don't think of them as rituals, but simply as moves you can keep in your pocket and carry them anywhere. So what moves are Taoist moves that you can keep in your pocket? Well, the pause move is a big one. When tension arises in an argument, in a violent news story, if you're sitting by yourself at night in bed watching chaos, pause. Heroes in comics almost always have a moment where time slows down before they act. You can create your own version of that. Just stop for 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds before speaking or reacting. Just stop and pause. And in your head, just go, 1001, 1002, 1003. And in that pause, you're no longer pushed by anger or fear. You're reclaiming your choice. You're then acting from clarity. Another move is a martial arts move. It's called the redirect. Martial arts is shaped by Taoism. Force isn't met head on, it's redirected. Right? In martial arts, almost all of them, especially the ones that are based in the Chinese culture, are all about redirecting the energy. So you can use the redirect move even if you're not a martial artist. If someone hurls anger at you, instead of hitting back, redirect that energy. A calm response like, okay, I hear you, but I'm not going to fight about this. That takes the fire out like that. It doesn't ignore the attack. It transforms it into a conversation. That's Taoist alchemy, baby. Turning conflict into something less corrosive. There's the step back move. Sometimes the most heroic choice is distance. Stepping back is not defeat, it's protection. It's you saying, I'm not going to carry this right now. That could mean turning off a broadcast or stopping a conversation that's gone too far. The step back move is a quick way. Have a boundary statement. Superheroes, almost all of them have a creed, right? A line that they won't cross. So craft your own. Craft your own Taoist version of a creed, something simple. We talked about it in the last episode about hate. A simple creed like, that belongs to them, not to me. That is not my barrel, those are not my monkeys. And repeat it. If someone tries to hand you their violence or fear, it's a shield. Not against punches, but against letting their state become your state. And then there's the balance reset. After taking in violence, whether it's through media or a heated encounter or something online, do something that restores your balance. It could be as simple as listening to calm music, stepping outside, or just sitting in silence for a few minutes. Think of it as your respite after a battle. Superhero trains and recovers. Well, you do the same. Not for your muscles, but for your spirit. When you feel tension at work, your boss is letting you have it, something dramatic has happened in your life, have a balance reset. It doesn't take long, I promise. Literally 3 minutes of just stepping away and finding a recovery. Each of these practices that I've talked about are super simple. None of them requires a costume. None of them requires anybody to watch you do it. But if you practice them consistently, they'll let you move through a world that's filled with conflict without becoming a conflict yourself, or without even becoming conflicted yourself. So when someone asks, are there Taoist superheroes? The answer is both mythic and personal. Yeah, sure. There are figures in Taoist tradition, but the deeper answer is, well, you can be one. By practicing clarity and compassion and distance in those moments where the world wants to push you off balance. So, what truths can we hold, and what simple practices can we carry to live as Taoist heroes in our daily life? And those are the best ones that I've got for you. Of the ones we just talked about, I would say the one that I practice the most in my life and probably always have since I started learning, and always will, even on days where I'm not walking in balance from the get-go. I can always get back with the redirect. I can always redirect. Take the fire out of any conversation or exchange. So, as we close things up today, let's get back to the question, because I believe it deserves an answer. Like I've gone on here with the sermon version of Taoist superheroes, right? But let's answer the question. Are there any Taoist superheroes? Let's take away all of the philosophical thought and give this person an answer. And I believe me, I took my time with this. And I went through, and hey, look, I'm a comic book dork. I'm a nerd when it comes to comic books. You should see them in my studio here. And I think if we're talking about the ones where the comics and movies that most of us know, the closest fit, and when I say fit, I just mean kind of Taoist, is probably Doctor Strange, portrayed in the movies by Benedict Cumberbatch. So why did I pick Doctor Strange? Well, his story is less about smashing villains and more about mastering himself. He starts out being arrogant and brittle, egotistical, chasing power for all the wrong reasons. And then something horrible happens to him, and his strength grows when he learns to let go. Remember the conversation that he has with the Ancient One in the first movie. Surrender to gain control. So when he learns to yield, to study, to practice, he begins to understand the forces bigger than himself. And then what happens? He aligns with them. Balance. Right? Instead of trying to control the forces, he becomes part of the Tao. And that's about as Taoist as Hollywood is ever going to get, I think. He even has that reminder baked in, right? The multiverse is vast. And your job isn't to bend it all to your will, it's to flow within it. So you might pick someone else. Maybe you see Taoist clarity in Spider-Man. Or Wonder Woman. Whoever. The point is, it's not one character that holds the Tao. Taoist values show up in moments we find inspiring. And the fact of the matter is, audiences will always respond when a hero pauses, when they choose compassion, when they endure without getting hard-hearted. Right? You understand? So here's a small practice for the week. Pick out a superhero film. Even if you're not a big fan, just pick out one and watch it. And notice when you find a Taoist moment. It's not going to be in the explosions. It's going to be in the pause, the act of restraint, the choice of mercy, or a shift toward balance. See if you can spot it. Those will be the moments that show how the Tao lives inside even our most modern myth. Because in the end, Taoist superheroes aren't just on screens or in old legends. They live in the choice that you make every day. And without sounding cheesy, that means the hero you've been looking for is probably already you. Like my teacher used to tell me all the time, I am not teaching you anything. I'm just revealing to you what you already know. Reminding you that you have it within you to be the superhero in your own life. And that will wrap up this episode of the Modern Taoist. And I thank you for coming along with me on this little journey every week. This week, 2 episodes dropped, and I hope you enjoyed them. And we'll see you next time. Don't forget to go to daoananda.org, DAOANANDA.org, or themoderntaoistpodcast.com. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Visit us online at daoananda.com or find us on all the socials. Please like or subscribe on this platform, and thanks again.